The Lost Book of Og is a mysterious and enigmatic text that has captured the imagination of scholars, theologians, and conspiracy theorists alike. Said to be the writings of Og, a giant mentioned in ancient Hebrew texts, this supposed work is rumoured to contain first-hand accounts of a pre-flood world, tales of the Nephilim, and chilling insights into the lives of giants who were once said to walk the earth. But what truth lies beneath the legend? And why has this book remained shrouded in mystery for centuries? While such claims might sound enticing, there is reason to approach the Lost Book of Og with caution. Despite its dramatic allure, there is no peer-reviewed examination of the text, and the only available versions found online come from dubious authors. Many of these translations lack academic rigour, and appear more at home on fringe websites than in serious historical discourse. With such suspicious provenance, it is difficult, if not impossible, to verify the content of the Lost Book of Og, let alone draw any credible conclusions from it. Therefore, in this episode, rather than focusing on the purported contents of the Lost Book of Og, we will instead explore the more concrete historical and literary references to the book and examine where this mysterious text is mentioned in credible sources, such as the Gelasian Decree, an early church document that lists heretical and apocryphal works, and the lost Apocrypha of the Old Testament, by respected translator Montague, Rhodes, James. By investigating what these writers thought of the Lost Book of Og, we can gain a better understanding of how this enigmatic work was viewed in antiquity, and why it remains such a compelling mystery today. We first see Og appear in the Book of Numbers as an Amorite king, the ruler of the region of Bashan, home to 60 walled cities. It was during the time that Moses had led the Israelites out of Egypt and trekked through the desert wilderness toward the land of Canaan. This venture would not prove to be without hassle, for the Israelites were required to pass through various territories that were not the most welcoming. Already by this point in the Book of Numbers, Moses and the Israelites had already encountered the Amorite king Sihon, who had refused them passage into his land. After a victory against Sihon at the Battle of Jahaz, Moses led the Israelites to Bashan, where King Og engaged them at the capital of Edrei. Here the Bible tells us of that epic confrontation, as well as the ultimate fate of King Og at the hands of Moses. For we are told, "The Lord said to Moses, 'Do not be afraid of him, for I have delivered him into your hands, along with his whole army and his land. Do to him what you did to Sihon, king of the Amorites, who reigned in Heshbon.' So they struck him down, together with his sons and his whole army, leaving them no survivors, and they took possession of the land." This same account is echoed in chapter 3 of Deuteronomy, telling us, "So the Lord our God also gave into our hands Og, king of Bashan, and all his army. We struck them down, leaving no survivors." In the same chapter, Deuteronomy deems it necessary to inform us that Og was the last of his kind, last of the Rephaites, or the Rephaim, Rephaim being the Hebrew word for giants. Indeed, there is a revelation here that Og was indeed something of a giant. In fact, Deuteronomy adds that his bed, or his sarcophagus in some translations, was so large that it warranted being recorded in scripture. We are told, "His bed was decorated with iron, and was more than 9 cubits long and 4 cubits wide." It's with such a legend that many readers have taken an interest in King Og, a man so large that even the author of Deuteronomy cannot help but sound impressed, which is something of a novelty within scripture. It would have been easy to have demonized the king for his violence against Moses and his position as an enemy of the Israelites. His massive size and measurements could have very easily been used to represent something monstrous and ungodly. Yet the text frames him with a sense of noteworthiness, perhaps as a means to enhance Moses' victory that he and his men were able to slay a giant, but still nonetheless piquing the reader's interest to consider King Og in more detail. and consider him in more detail many have. In the Gelasian Decree, a work consisting of letters pertaining to the ecclesiastic law by 5th century Pope Gelasius I, the Book of Og is explicitly mentioned, where we see it condemned in a long list of other apocryphal works as being heretical. Gelasius encourages readers not to entertain the works in question, and that they ought to have been avoided by Catholics in general. This shows us that whilst the Book of Og is lost to us today, it was at least known by church authorities back then, and held enough weight that it was specifically highlighted as being blasphemous material. Indeed, it's entirely possible that Gelasius and his ilk had never truly held nor read the alleged book in its entirety, but he did seem to have a gist of what the narrative was about, telling us the book about Og the giant, of whom the heretics assert that after the deluge, he fought with the dragon. Unfortunately, Gelasius doesn't tell us anything else pertaining to this elusive story. We know from the overall Gelasian Decree that the book was circulated by heretics, but we aren't told by which heretics specifically. Some theorize that it may have been passed around by the Manichaeans as part of a Gnostic tradition, something akin to the Manichaean Book of Giants, but there is no way to be sure. Whilst we have no actual book to consult, and possess only a tidbit of what actually transpires in this greater narrative of Og, you might be tempted to imagine that the giant Rephaim, found in Numbers and Deuteronomy, did manage to find himself in a fight with a dragon in this narrative. Although not just any dragon, but the dragon. The definitive article "the" gives us the idea that Gelasius is referring to Lucifer here, who took the form of a dragon and was the only other dragon we know of in the Bible. You'll be forgiven, based on Gelasius' phrasing, for considering the possibility that Og somehow found himself in a battle with Satan. But beyond this, it's impossible to know when this encounter would have taken place, and how it would have even transpired. In fact, you can even argue that this Og in the Book of Og is not the same as the one found in the traditional Bible. Others suggest that the dragon in this supposed narrative wasn't the same dragon that Lucifer transformed into either, but was rather something else more serpentine. Perhaps Leviathan. Indeed, if we were to consult the Manichaean version of the Book of Giants by Armenian prophet Mani, who essentially constructed his own version of the fate of the Nephilim, we see that the principal character Oya fights and kills Leviathan during the final stages of the deluge. With this in mind, it's possible that there was a conflation of the characters Oya and Og at some point in history, at least perhaps with the narrative that Mani put together. Indeed, there are those who believe that the Book of Og was linked to Mani's Book of Giants, and may have simply been yet another apocryphal interpretation of these events, based on the narrative that originally came out of the caves of Qumran. Another idea is that the Book of Og was Mani's version of the Book of Giants, or at least it followed the same framework. However, if we were to believe that Og was around during those times, and that this was the same Og from the Numbers and Deuteronomy accounts, then it does raise some questions as to how Og survived the flood, and lived a number of years before ultimately meeting his demise at the hands of Moses. It certainly is a far cry from the more accepted biblical narrative, and yet there does exist some rabbinic traditions found in the work Legends of Old Testament Characters, a collection of Jewish narratives by Reverend Sabine Baron Gould, that echo such sentiments. In such accounts, Og was one of the antediluvian giants who had escaped the flood by clinging onto the roof of Noah's Ark. In fact, some traditions put forth that Noah had fed the giant, and that he would go on to become conflated with Eliza, the servant of Abraham. Yet even in these accounts, Og is never seen to fight a dragon of any kind. In the Lost Apocrypha of the Old Testament, by author Montague Rhodes James, we learn of another account that appears in the Anglo-Saxon Dialogue of Solomon and Saturn, where we see King Solomon questioning the pagan deity Saturn about various aspects of the world. In one part of the poem, Solomon asks Saturn to tell him of the land where no man may step. To this, Saturn replies that there was once a man who went by the name Wandering Wolf, and that he was well known amongst the Philistines, and something of a friend to Nimrod. Somewhere on the plains of the desert, this Wandering Wolf killed 25 dragons before he himself was felled. Because this Wandering Wolf's feat was so heroic and miraculous, Saturn tells Solomon that no man may ever step foot there, nor can any bird fly over it. While Saturn does not explicitly name Og as being this Wandering Wolf, those like Montague James propose that because of his association as Nimrod's friend, assuming Nimrod was a giant too, we at the very least get the imagery of a giant fending off and slaying dragons that, according to this narrative, roamed the wilderness of the desert. Whether this was Og, and indeed whether Og was this antediluvian giant who survived the flood, will likely always be up for debate, at least until we get our hands on an authentic and verified book of Og. As we can see, even within apocryphal literature, where one might expect elaboration on such a legendary figure, sources regarding this Book of Og remain scarce. Indeed, this so-called book appears to only exist within the fragments of hearsay, noteworthy enough to be referenced in the Gelasian Decree, but never recovered by subsequent audiences. Perhaps in that regard, the early Catholic Church did a thorough job of warding believers away from such a text, by not only stamping out the tradition, but also by relegating the book into legend. Unlike other giants in ancient literature, whose stories are expanded upon in stories like the Book of Giants or 1 Enoch, Og and its purported involvement in antediluvian matters remains largely shrouded in mystery. Such a story, though intriguing, is ultimately lost to time, leaving us to wonder whether such a legend was once told in full, or if the shadowy presence of a rogue giant in scripture was always meant to be just that, a fleeting echo of a bygone era. As always guys, if you've enjoyed today's episode, then don't forget to leave this video a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more content just like this. Until next time.